Still playing CEO with your cute little app. My brother-in-law smirked across the Thanksgiving table, swirling his expensive bourbon. I kept my face blank and handed him the bowl of mashed potatoes. He had no idea that while he was calling me a broke failure in front of my parents, my phone was vibrating with an email from his own acquisition team. They were raising their desperate buyout offer for my cute little app to $40 million. He was about to risk his entire career trying to buy a company he did not even know belonged to me. The sharp clink of silver hitting fine china echoed through my parents' dining room. Julian sat at the head of the table like a king surveying his subjects. At 35, Julian was a senior partner at Vanguard Equity in Chicago. An African-American man with a tailored Tom Ford suit and a reputation for gutting struggling tech startups, he wore his corporate power like a weapon. Tonight, his favorite target was me. "When are you going to get a real job?" Valerie Julian asked, leaning back in his chair. "You are 31 years old. This little software hobby of yours is a dead end." My mother nodded eagerly, taking a sip of her wine. "Julian is right, Valerie. You have a business degree. You could be working as a clerk at a real firm instead of sitting in your apartment pretending to be an entrepreneur. Look at your sister. She married well. She has stability." I looked at my older sister, Vanessa. She adjusted a diamond bracelet that cost more than my first car. She did not offer a word of defense. She just offered a cold, satisfied smile. "Actually," Vanessa said, pointing her silver fork at me, "since your schedule is so empty, I need you at our estate on Saturday. Julian is hosting the Vanguard Executive Board for a networking dinner. You are going to scrub the outdoor patio and manage the guest coats. The catering staff needs someone to clear the dirty plates, and you need to earn your keep." My jaw tightened. "You want me to work as your unpaid maid?" I asked. My father slammed his palm on the dining table. The crystal wine glasses rattled against the wood. "Do not look at your sister like that," he ordered, his face flushing red. "You bring zero value to this family. You will show up at their house, you will serve those drinks, and you will say thank you." The air in the room grew thick. Julian watched me, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the humiliation. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to storm out of the house so he could label me unstable. I did not give him the satisfaction. I picked up my fork, cut a piece of turkey, and took a bite. "I will think about it," I said quietly. Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Keep thinking, Valerie. That is why you will always be at the bottom of the food chain." Deep in the pocket of my wool cardigan, my phone buzzed twice. A custom vibration pattern. I slipped my hand under the tablecloth and tapped the screen alive. A secure text from my corporate attorney, Sterling, illuminated the dark fabric. "Vanguard Equity is bleeding capital," Sterling wrote. "Their internal systems are crashing. They just raised their blind acquisition offer for Nexus Logic to $40 million cash. Julian is the lead negotiator on their end. He is begging for an immediate meeting." I stared at the glowing screen. The man sitting across from me, the man who just called me a leech, was currently hemorrhaging millions of dollars at his firm. He was begging a faceless tech founder for salvation. He had zero clue that the founder he was hunting was the same woman he just ordered to scrub his patio. "My name is Valerie. I am 31 years old, and I build corporate logistics software. Before I tell you how I forced my arrogant brother-in-law to finance his own destruction, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe arrogant bullies always orchestrate their own downfall." The scalding water burned my hands as I scrubbed the grease from the heavy roasting pan. Through the swinging door of the kitchen, I could hear the clinking of crystal and the low murmur of self-congratulation drifting from the dining room. Julian was holding court, regaling my parents with tales of his latest corporate conquests. I was the designated help. I always was. The kitchen door swung open, hitting the wall with a sharp thud. Vanessa marched in. She did not carry a single dirty plate. Instead, she slapped a thick sheet of cream cardstock onto the wet counter right next to the sink. I turned off the faucet. The sudden silence in the kitchen made the ambient noise from the dining room seem miles away. I looked down at the cardstock. It was a bulleted list written in her flawless, looping cursive. "I expect you at our house by 6 in the morning on Saturday," Vanessa ordered, crossing her arms. "The Vanguard executives are arriving at 7 in the evening. You need to power wash the travertine tiles on the back patio before the caterers set up the outdoor bar. After that, I need you to polish the sterling silver cutlery and organize the coat check room. You will wear a plain black dress. I do not want you mingling with Julian's colleagues." I picked up a dish towel and dried my hands, taking my time. I stared at my older sister. She stood there, dripping in diamonds paid for by a man who treated her like an accessory, demanding I act as her personal servant to maintain her facade. "Hire a cleaning service, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I am not your maid." Vanessa scoffed, her eyes flashing with instant irritation. "A cleaning service costs money. You have nothing but free time. Julian said it perfectly out there. You sit around all day playing on your computer. It is time you actually contributed something useful to this family." I tossed the dish towel onto the counter. "I have a company to run." "A company," Vanessa mocked, stepping closer. "You call that joke of an app a company. You do not generate any profit. You are living in a shoebox apartment. Do not pretend your schedule is full of important board meetings. You will be at my house on Saturday or Julian will be furious." I stepped past her, heading for the coat rack by the back door. "Tell Julian he can scrub his own patio." I did not make it to the door. My father pushed through the swinging kitchen door. His face flushed a deep, angry red from the bourbon and the perceived disrespect. My mother trailed closely behind him, clutching her wine glass like a shield. They moved as a united front, a coordinated ambush designed to trap me in the narrow space between the island and the refrigerator. "What is this attitude, Valerie?" my father demanded, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "Your sister asked you for a simple favor." "She handed me a chore list for her husband's corporate dinner," I corrected him. I declined. My mother stepped forward, her expression twisting into a mask of bitter disappointment. "You are so selfish, Valerie. You went to university, got a business degree, and what did you do with it? You opened some useless software startup that brings in zero income. You sit in your cheap apartment pretending to be an entrepreneur while your sister is out there maintaining the reputation of this family." I looked at my mother. Maintaining the reputation of this family meant hosting cocktail parties for venture capitalists who despise them. "You will do exactly what your sister asks," my father ordered, pointing a thick finger at my chest. "You owe her. You owe us." "I owe you nothing," I replied flatly. "I pay my own rent. I pay my own bills. I have not asked you for a dime since I turned 18. My father let out a harsh, scraping laugh. "You think you are so independent. You have no idea what we have sacrificed to keep this family afloat while you play your little games." He stepped into my personal space, towering over me. "You think Vanessa's life is easy. She has obligations. Julian demands perfection. When she fell behind on her credit card payments, trying to keep up her wardrobe for his corporate retreats, Julian threatened to cut her off. He threatened to leave her." My mother sniffled, playing the role of the beleaguered matriarch. "We had to step in, Valerie. We had to save her marriage." I stared at them, the pieces falling into place. Vanessa was drowning in secret debt to fund her artificial lifestyle, and Julian kept her on a tight financial leash. But my parents did not have liquid cash. My father was a retired middle manager. Their pension was fixed. "How did you pay off her debt?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. My father's jaw tightened. "We took out a hard money loan. We used the commercial storage facility as collateral." The air left my lungs. The commercial storage facility was a climate-controlled warehouse on the edge of town. It held a few old family antiques, but more importantly, it held every single item that belonged to my late grandmother. She was the only person in this bloodline who ever showed me an ounce of genuine affection. When she died, my parents refused to let me keep her things in my tiny apartment. They locked her antique furniture, her photo albums, her handwritten journals, and her grand piano inside that storage unit. They held the legal deed to the unit. It was the only tangible proof I had that someone had once loved me. "You mortgaged Grandma's belongings to pay for Vanessa's designer handbags," I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do not take that tone with me," my father snapped. "We did what we had to do for family. The interest rate on that loan is brutal. We are barely making the monthly payments. If Julian divorces your sister, he will stop paying her allowance. She will move back in with us, and we will default on the loan. The bank will seize the storage unit and auction off everything inside it." He leaned closer, his eyes cold and devoid of any paternal warmth. "You are going to clean that house on Saturday. You are going to serve Julian's guests, and you are going to smile while you do it. You are going to make sure Julian's dinner party is a flawless success so he keeps financing your sister's life. And if I refuse, I challenged. Then I stop paying the interest on the storage unit tomorrow morning, my father stated ruthlessly. I will call the estate liquidator myself. I will have every single piece of your grandmother's junk thrown into a landfill before the weekend. Her journals, her photos, all of it. Gone. The silence in the kitchen was suffocating. My mother watched me waiting for the inevitable surrender. Vanessa stood by the sink, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. They knew how much those journals meant to me. They knew I spent my childhood sitting at my grandmother's feet, listening to her tell stories about building a life from scratch. They were weaponizing my grief to force me into servitude. They expected me to break. They expected tears. They expected me to lower my head, pick up the cardstock list, and beg them not to throw away my only connection to the past. For 31 years I had bent to their will to keep the peace. I had swallowed their insults. I had accepted my role as the designated failure. But as I stood trapped in that kitchen, I felt the sharp rectangular outline of my phone resting in my cardigan pocket. The screen was dark, but the message from my attorney was burned into my memory. Vanguard Equity was bleeding cash. Julian was desperate to acquire my software for $40 million to save his own career. My family was threatening to burn my past over a high-interest personal loan. They had no idea I was currently holding the detonator to their entire future. I looked at my father. I saw the petty, tyrannical satisfaction in his eyes. I looked at my mother, who enabled every ounce of his cruelty. I looked at Vanessa, a hollow shell of a woman who needed to humiliate her sister to feel secure in her own failing marriage. They derived their power by holding my attachments hostage. To defeat a hostage-taker, you have to prove that the hostage no longer holds any value. I reached behind my waist and untied the knot of my apron. I pulled the fabric over my head in one slow, deliberate motion. I folded the apron neatly in half. I stepped toward the counter, closing the distance between myself and my sister. I placed the folded apron directly on top of Vanessa's demanding chore list. My father's smug expression faltered. "Valerie, do not test me. I will call the liquidator." I looked him dead in the eye. My heart was a block of ice. "Sell it," I said. The words landed in the kitchen like a physical blow. My mother gasped, taking a step back. Vanessa's smirk vanished, replaced by sheer, unfiltered shock. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly open, unable to process the fact that his ultimate threat had just shattered against a wall of pure indifference. "I said sell it," I repeated, ensuring my voice carried no hesitation. "Sell the furniture, burn the photo albums, throw the journals into a dumpster. I do not care. You think a pile of old wood and paper gives you the right to turn me into an unpaid servant for a man who treats us all like garbage. You are wrong." I turned away from them and grabbed my wool coat from the rack. I slid my arms into the sleeves, my movements unhurried and precise. "You walk out that door, and you are no longer part of this family." My father roared, his face contorting with a sudden violent panic as he realized he had lost control of the narrative. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob. I glanced back over my shoulder at the three people standing in the kitchen. They looked small. They looked pathetic. "That is the best Thanksgiving gift I have ever received," I replied. I opened the door and stepped out into the freezing Chicago night. The cold air hit my face sharp and biting, but it felt like pure oxygen. I did not look back as I walked down the driveway toward my car. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I did not need to look at the screen to know what it was. The war had officially started, and I was going to ensure Julian and my family paid for every single insult with interest. The heating in my office building was notoriously unreliable on Monday mornings. I sat at my desk wearing my winter coat, the collar turned up against the draft leaking through the poorly insulated window. The space was barely 400 square feet, located above a dry cleaner in Wicker Park. Exposed brick, cheap laminate flooring, and 3 oversized monitors. It was not a glamorous tech hub, but the code I wrote inside these 4 walls was flawless. Nexus Logic was not a cute little app for tracking calories or scheduling yoga classes. It was a brutal, highly complex B2B supply chain optimization software. It tracked maritime shipping containers, flagged logistical bottlenecks in real time, and utilized predictive algorithms to save enterprise corporations millions of dollars in wasted operational costs. I built it from the ground up over 4 grueling years.
Sitting across from me on a mismatched folding chair was David Sterling. At 62, Sterling was a veteran corporate litigator who specialized in high-stakes technology acquisitions. He wore custom-tailored wool suits and possessed the kind of calm, lethal intelligence that terrified opposing counsel. He did not care that my office smelled faintly of industrial starch. He cared about the numbers on the screen. He tossed a thick black leather folder onto my desk. It landed heavily, covering a stack of my handwritten coding notes. They capitulated over the weekend, Sterling said, leaning back and resting his hands on his stomach. The buyers matched our valuation. $40 million, all cash, escrow funding verified. I pulled the folder toward me and opened it. The glossy paper inside bore the unmistakable aggressive corporate letterhead of Vanguard Equity. Vanguard Equity was a massive Chicago-based venture capital firm. They were currently managing a distressed subsidiary called Apex Logistics, a sprawling freight company bleeding capital due to an antiquated failing software system. Apex was losing roughly $2 million a month in misrouted shipments and delayed warehouse processing. My software Nexus Logic was the only existing plug-and-play architecture capable of integrating with their legacy servers and halting the financial hemorrhage. I held the sole patent. I owned 100% of the equity. I was their only lifeline. I skimmed the preliminary term sheet. The numbers were staggering. It was generational wealth. It was the kind of money that buys penthouses in the Gold Coast and private jets. I flipped to the second page, examining the signatures of the buyer's negotiating team. The lead acquisitions director for Vanguard Equity was listed in bold print. Julian Hayes, my brother-in-law, the same man who had mocked me over turkey and stuffing, demanding I scrub his patio. Because we were utilizing a strict blind broker agreement, Julian only knew he was negotiating with the legal representation of Nexus Logic. He had no idea the founder and sole owner of the company, holding his career hostage, was his wife's younger sister. "He is getting desperate," Sterling noted, observing the slight tightening of my jaw as I read Julian's name. The internal pressure at Vanguard must be immense. His emails over the weekend shifted from standard corporate posturing to outright aggression. Sterling pulled a tablet from his briefcase and tapped the screen, pulling up the communication logs. "Read the correspondence he sent me on Saturday evening." I took the tablet. Julian's emails were a masterclass in narcissistic corporate bullying. Sterling Julian had written, "Your client's refusal to finalize the $35 million offer by Friday is unacceptable. Vanguard Equity does not wait on boutique startup founders. You inform your client that if they do not execute the asset transfer by Monday morning, we will pull our capital and bankrupt their little operation through litigation. Tell the developer to stop playing games and sign the contract, or I will personally ensure they never secure funding in this city again." I stared at the screen. The language was identical to the way he spoke to my sister. The same domineering, arrogant cadence. He operated under the delusion that everyone existed to serve his immediate needs, and any resistance was a personal insult to his authority. He believed he was intimidating a faceless, socially awkward programmer. He had no idea he was threatening a woman who had spent 31 years learning how to weaponize silence against bullies. I set the tablet down and looked up at my attorney. "He is threatening litigation because he has zero leverage," I stated calmly. "Apex Logistics is dragging down Vanguard's quarterly earnings. If Julian fails to acquire Nexus Logic, his board of directors will hold him personally responsible for the continuing losses. He is not negotiating from a position of strength. He is negotiating from a position of profound terror." Sterling nodded, a small, approving smile playing on his lips. "Exactly. The $40 million offer is a clear indicator of panic. We have them cornered, Valerie. We can execute the closing documents this afternoon and you walk away with the capital." I looked back down at the folder. $40 million was the finish line. It was the payout I had worked 80-hour weeks to secure. But signing a piece of paper in a dusty office above a dry cleaner did not balance the ledger. I thought about my father threatening to destroy my grandmother's journals. I thought about Vanessa demanding I act as her servant. I thought about Julian mocking my intelligence in front of my own family. Taking their money was not enough. I needed to take their dignity. I needed Julian to look me in the eye when he handed over the check. "We are not signing today, Sterling," I said, closing the black leather folder with a decisive snap.
Sterling raised an eyebrow, his professional composure faltering for a fraction of a second. Valerie, 40 million is the absolute ceiling of their authorization. If we push for more capital, they might actually walk away and attempt to build a proprietary system regardless of the time cost. I do not want more money, I replied, my voice dropping to a low clinical register. I want an in-person meeting with the Vanguard Executive Board. Sterling frowned, leaning forward. A blind broker agreement is designed to protect your identity until the final wire transfer. If you demand an in-person meeting, you void the anonymity clause. You expose yourself to the buyer before the ink is dry on the master contract. Julian Hayes will know he is negotiating with his sister-in-law. That is exactly the point I stated. I leaned my elbows on the desk, locking eyes with my attorney. Julian Hayes is a corporate predator who thrives on the perceived weakness of others. He insulted me publicly less than 48 hours ago because he believes I am a worthless failure. If I sign this contract in secret, he wins. He gets to go home, brag to his wife about his brilliant acquisition, and continue treating my family like his personal court jesters. I tapped the black folder. I want him to walk into a boardroom expecting to dominate a desperate tech founder. I want him surrounded by his senior partners, his board of directors, and his managing executives. And then I want to walk through that door and watch him realize that his entire career depends on the mercy of the woman he just ordered to scrub his patio. Sterling stared at me. He was a man who had orchestrated hundreds of corporate acquisitions, but he rarely witnessed a founder weaponize an M&A deal for personal retribution. The corners of his eyes crinkled in quiet amusement. He recognized the tactical brilliance of the maneuver. It was high risk, but the psychological devastation it would inflict on the buyer was immeasurable. You want to execute the final contract signing in their headquarters, Sterling confirmed, pulling a legal pad from his briefcase. Yes, I said. Draft an addendum to the term sheet. State that the founder of Nexus Logic formally accepts the $40 million valuation pending a final mandatory in-person review of the integration timeline with the Vanguard Executive Board. Set the meeting for Thursday morning. Sterling jotted down the notes, his silver pen moving swiftly across the yellow paper. Julian will be furious about the delay, but he will accept the meeting. He cannot afford to lose the software. Send him the addendum I instructed. And Sterling. He looked up. Ensure the addendum requires the attendance of Richard Vance. Sterling paused, his pen hovering over the paper. Richard Vance is the primary angel investor backing Vanguard Equity. He sits on their supreme board. He rarely attends operational acquisition meetings unless a deal exceeds $100 million. Richard Vance is also the silent seed investor who funded Nexus Logic during my series around 3 years ago. I revealed, watching the realization wash over Sterling's face. He knows exactly who I am, and he knows the true value of my software. If Julian attempts to sabotage the deal when he discovers my identity, Vance will override him. I want the highest authority in that room. Sterling let out a low whistle, shaking his head in admiration. You are building a very precise guillotine, Valerie. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the frosty window, looking down at the gray, slush-covered streets of Chicago. I had spent my entire life standing quietly in the background while my family celebrated mediocrity and punished independence. They demanded my compliance under the threat of destroying my history. I am not just building a guillotine, Sterling, I said, watching a city bus rumble past the dry cleaner below. I am sending out the invitations to the execution. Send the email to Julian. Let him think he won. Sterling packed the Vanguard Equity acquisition documents back into his leather briefcase. He promised to send the revised addendum to Julian Hayes within the hour and exited my office, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of my server fans. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee and turned back to my primary monitor, reviewing a final patch of code for the Nexus Logic logistics algorithm. The software was fully operational, ready for the hostile integration into Vanguard's failing systems. The heavy metal door of my office building slammed open, the sound echoing sharply up the narrow wooden stairwell. I paused my typing. The dry cleaner downstairs rarely generated that kind of noise. Heavy, erratic footsteps pounded up the stairs, followed by the violent rattle of my frosted glass office door being thrown open. Vanessa stood in the doorway. She did not look like the composed, arrogant socialite who had demanded my servitude at the Thanksgiving table just days ago. Her designer trench coat was hastily buttoned. Her makeup was smudged under her eyes,
and her usually pristine blowout was a tangled mess. She gripped a Prada handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she locked eyes with me. "Valerie," she gasped, pushing the glass door shut behind her. She did not bother with a greeting. She marched directly to my desk, bypassing the small sitting area. "I need money, now." I did not stand up. I did not offer her a chair. I slowly moved my coffee mug away from the edge of the desk, assessing her frantic demeanor. "You need money," I repeated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of inflection. "Did Julian forget to deposit your weekly allowance? Do not start with your sarcastic attitude." Vanessa snapped, her voice shrill and trembling. "Julian found out. He found out about the credit cards. He ran a credit check for a new commercial real estate investment and saw the balances. He canceled all my supplementary cards this morning. He locked the joint checking accounts. I went to buy a coffee at Starbucks and my card was declined." "Declined, Valerie. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I leaned back in my chair. The puzzle pieces from the kitchen confrontation snapped perfectly into place. My parents had mortgaged my grandmother's belongings to cover Vanessa's initial debts, but she had not stopped spending. She had simply opened new hidden accounts to fund her desperate need to match the wealth of Julian's corporate wives. "Julian cut you off," I stated, identifying the root of her panic. "He is threatening to file for divorce if I do not clear the balances by Friday." Vanessa cried, her voice cracking. "He said I embarrassed him. He said I was a liability. The debt is $50,000, Valerie. If he divorces me, I lose the house. I lose the country club membership. I lose everything." She slammed both her hands down on my desk, leaning over my monitors. "I went to Mom and Dad, but they are tapped out. The bank will not give them another cent on the storage unit collateral. You have to sign as a guarantor on a personal loan for me. Today, right now, I have the paperwork in my bag." I stared at her. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was breathtaking. Less than 48 hours ago, she had stood in my parents' kitchen and mocked my career, demanding I scrub her patio like a hired maid. Now, she was demanding I leverage my personal credit to save her from the consequences of her own financial fraud. "You want me to co-sign a $50,000 high-interest loan to cover your designer handbags?" I asked, clarifying the absurdity of her demand. "It is a short-term bridge loan," Vanessa insisted, frantically digging into her Prada bag and pulling out a crumpled stack of loan application documents. "I just need your signature and proof of income. You have an LLC." The shady online lender said a corporate guarantor would expedite the approval. "Just sign the paper, Valerie." She shoved the documents across my desk. They hit my keyboard, partially covering my screen. I looked at the paperwork. I looked at the frantic, entitled woman standing in my office. "No," I said. Vanessa froze. Her hand hovered over the desk. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I replied, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. "I am not co-signing a predatory loan for you. I am not absorbing your debt. I am not sacrificing my financial stability to protect a marriage built on lies and stolen money. You owe me." Vanessa shrieked, the panic morphing instantly into venomous rage. "I am your older sister. Mom and Dad always said we have to look out for each other. Mom and Dad told me they would burn my grandmother's journals if I did not act as your unpaid servant," I corrected her. "That is not looking out for each other. That is extortion. You dug this hole yourself, Vanessa. You can climb out of it yourself." Vanessa's face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered malice. The fragile facade of the desperate sister evaporated, revealing the vicious narcissist underneath. "You jealous, spiteful little bitch," she hissed, spittle flying from her lips. "You have always hated me because Julian is successful and I have a real life. You sit in this pathetic, dusty office above a dry cleaner playing on your computer, and you think you are better than me. This garbage you build does not make any money. You are a failure." She glared at the 3 monitors on my desk, displaying the complex Nexus logic code architecture. "If you are not going to help me, then you do not need this trash," she screamed. Vanessa lunged across the desk. She grabbed the primary external hard drive sitting next to my main monitor. It was the physical backup drive containing the redundant source code for the Vanguard integration. She yanked the cord, tearing the USB connection out of the port. She raised the heavy metal drive above her head, her eyes wild with the intent to smash it onto the laminate floor and destroy what she believed was my only asset. I did not scream. I did not leap across the desk to wrestle her for the drive.
The data was securely backed up on 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. The physical drive was irrelevant. I calmly reached out and pressed a small discreet button mounted under the lip of my desk. It connected directly to the private security firm contracted by the building management. Vanessa hesitated, confused by my lack of reaction. "Why are you not crying?" she demanded, her chest heaving, the hard drive still raised above her head. "Tell me you will sign the loan or I smash your entire pathetic company into pieces." I looked at the telephone on my desk. The speakerphone light blinked green. "Security desk. State your emergency," a gruff professional voice echoed from the speaker. "I have an unauthorized individual in Suite 3B," I stated clearly, keeping my eyes locked on Vanessa. "She is actively attempting to destroy corporate property and has become physically aggressive. I need her removed from the premises immediately." Vanessa's jaw dropped. The hard drive slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly onto my desk, missing the edge of the monitor by inches. "You called the cops on me. I am your sister. You are a trespasser." I corrected her, disconnecting the call. "I cannot believe you," Vanessa screamed, tears of rage finally spilling over her mascara. "You are dead to this family, Valerie. When Mom and Dad hear about this, they will disown you. They will sell every piece of Grandma's junk to the lowest bidder. You will have nothing. You will be completely alone." Heavy footsteps thundered up the wooden stairwell. The glass door of my office swung open. 2 large uniformed security guards stepped into the room. They took one look at Vanessa, who was currently leaning over my desk, screaming obscenities, and immediately moved to intervene. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the desk and come with us," the lead guard ordered, grabbing her by the upper arm. "Get your hands off me!" Vanessa shrieked, thrashing against the guard's grip. "Do you know who my husband is? He will buy this building and have you fired. Let go of me." The second guard secured her other arm. They did not care about her husband. They cared about the disturbance. They dragged her backward away from my desk, pulling her toward the open office door. "You are a failure," Valerie Vanessa screamed over her shoulder as they wrestled her into the hallway. "Julian is right about you. You are worthless. You will always be worthless." The heavy glass door swung shut, muffling her hysterical screaming as the guards escorted her down the stairs and out onto the freezing Chicago street. I sat alone in my quiet office. I reached out and picked up the disconnected external hard drive. I plugged the USB cord back into the port. A small green light blinked, confirming the hardware was undamaged. I looked at the empty doorway. My sister had just tried to destroy my livelihood to save her artificial marriage. My parents were preparing to destroy my grandmother's legacy to protect her. They thought they were punishing me. They thought they were asserting their dominance. They had absolutely no idea that in 48 hours, Julian Hayes was going to walk into a boardroom and hand the worthless failure $40 million, inadvertently financing the absolute destruction of their entire toxic ecosystem. I opened my email client. I had an acquisition to finalize. The silence in my office after Vanessa's forced removal was profound. I spent the next 2 hours recalibrating the integration protocols for the Nexus Logic software, ensuring the transition logic would flawlessly interface with Vanguard Equity's failing architecture. I operated with cold mechanical efficiency. At exactly 1:45 in the afternoon, my personal cell phone buzzed violently against the laminate desk. The vibration pattern was harsh, continuous. I picked up the phone. The screen was flooded with a rapid-fire succession of text messages from Julian. He was entirely unaware of the incident with Vanessa at my office. He was not texting to defend his wife. He was texting because my parents had informed him that I refused to act as his unpaid servant for his upcoming executive dinner. His fragile narcissistic ego could not process the insubordination. I unlocked the screen and read the messages. The digital venom was staggering. "Your father just told me you refused to help Vanessa prep for the board dinner this Saturday. You ungrateful, arrogant little bitch. We offer to let you associate with people of actual value and you throw it in our faces." I watched the 3 gray dots pulse on the screen as he rapidly typed the next message. "You think playing on your computer makes you special? You are a joke, Valerie. You are a broke, pathetic leech draining your parents dry. Do not ever show your face at my house again. Do not ever ask me for a dime when your fake little startup inevitably goes bankrupt." Another message materialized instantly. "You will never reach the level of the people in my circle. You are nothing. Remember that."
I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer, unadulterated contempt radiating from the text messages was breathtaking. Julian genuinely believed he was a titan of industry, untouchable on his corporate throne, benevolently allowing a peasant to breathe the same air. He derived deep pathological satisfaction from attempting to crush my self-worth. I did not reply. I did not block his number. I simply set the phone face up on my desk, right next to my keyboard. I wanted the messages visible. I wanted a physical reminder of exactly who I was dealing with. A sharp chime echoed from my computer speakers. A new email had arrived in my secure corporate inbox. I moved my mouse and clicked on the notification. The email was forwarded from Sterling, my acquisitions attorney. The original sender was Julian Hayes, lead acquisitions director, Vanguard Equity. I leaned forward, reading the text on the large high-definition monitor. The contrast between the furious text messages on my phone and the desperate corporate email on my screen was a masterpiece of psychological irony. Mr. Sterling Julian had written his usual aggressive corporate tone entirely absent, replaced by naked, bleeding desperation. Vanguard Equity formally accepts the $40 million valuation for the complete acquisition of Nexus Logic. We accept the integration addendum. We concede to the founder's demand for a mandatory in-person review meeting with our executive board prior to the final signature. I scrolled down to read the second paragraph. The armor of the arrogant senior partner was completely fractured. I implore you to expedite the scheduling of this meeting, Julian wrote. Apex Logistics is hemorrhaging capital at an unsustainable rate. The legacy system failures are compounding daily. We need the Nexus Logic architecture integrated immediately. Please arrange the boardroom meeting for Monday morning at the absolute latest. I am facing severe pressure from my board of directors. My position at this firm relies entirely on the successful closure of this acquisition. Tell your client we will accommodate any logistical requirement they have to finalize this deal. I sat back in my chair. The quiet hum of the server fans filled the small office above the dry cleaner. I looked at my cell phone. You will never reach the level of the people in my circle. You are nothing. I looked at my monitor. My position at this firm relies entirely on the successful closure of this acquisition. Tell your client we will accommodate any requirement. It was the same man, typing with the same hands, operating in the exact same hour. In his personal life, Julian was a tyrant, viciously belittling his sister-in-law to maintain a facade of supreme superiority. In his professional life, he was currently bleeding out on a boardroom floor, actively begging that same sister-in-law, hidden behind a corporate veil, to save his career from absolute ruin. He was simultaneously attempting to destroy my dignity while praying to a faceless tech founder for salvation. He had no idea that the peasant he was currently screaming at via text message was holding the absolute power of life and death over his entire corporate existence. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face, the kind of smile that rarely reaches the eyes. I reached out and hit reply on the email thread to Sterling. Confirm the meeting for Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning. I typed, my fingers striking the keys with lethal precision. Vanguard Equity Headquarters. Tell Mr. Hayes the founder expects the entire executive board to be present for the signing. I hit send. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Julian thought he was walking into a boardroom on Monday to secure his triumphant acquisition and save his job. He thought he had successfully bullied his wife's worthless sister into submission. He was fundamentally incapable of recognizing that the two narratives were about to violently collide. I picked up my cell phone, glanced at his abusive text messages one last time, and swiped them away. I had a $40 million empire to finalize and a corporate execution to attend. The satisfaction of Julian's desperate email had barely settled when my office phone began to ring. The shrill sound cut through the quiet focus I had maintained since finalizing the Vanguard meeting. I glanced at the caller ID on the console. It was my parents' landline. I let it ring 3 times before picking up the receiver. I did not offer a greeting. Valerie, my mother, shrieked the moment the line connected. Her voice was brittle, weaponized with a practiced, hysterical indignation. I did not ask how she was. I did not ask why she was calling. I waited. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded, her volume rising. "Vanessa just called me sobbing from her car. She said you had security violently throw her out of your building. She is traumatized, Valerie. She went to your office to seek comfort because her marriage is falling apart and you treated her like a criminal. I stared at the blinking green light on the phone console. Comfort, I repeated, keeping my tone entirely clinical. She ripped the backup hard drive out of my computer and attempted to smash it onto the floor. She threatened to destroy my company. That is not seeking comfort. That is a psychotic break. Do not you dare call your sister a psychopath. My father's voice boomed over the speakerphone, cutting off my mother. He had clearly been listening in the background, waiting for his cue to escalate the intimidation. She is under immense stress. Julian cut off her credit cards. She is terrified of losing her lifestyle. You are her sister. You are supposed to absorb her anger and help her. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the sheer absurdity of his statement wash over me. Absorb her anger, I echoed softly. You want me to act as a physical punching bag for a woman who committed financial fraud to buy designer shoes. My father ignored my logic, plowing forward with the ruthless entitlement that defined his parenting style. You are going to drive to Julian's house right now. You are going to apologize to Vanessa for humiliating her, and you are going to beg Julian for forgiveness for your insubordination earlier. I remained silent. I let the dead air stretch across the connection, forcing them to sit with the weight of their own demands. And there is one more thing, my father continued, his voice dropping into a harsh, punitive register. The mask of familial concern vanished entirely, replaced by raw extortion. Since you refuse to act like a member of this family, you lose the privileges of this family. I just got off the phone with a liquidator. My stomach tightened, but I did not let my breathing change. I gave them the access code to the commercial storage unit my father stated, delivering the threat with cold, calculated cruelty. They are sending a truck over this afternoon. They are going to clear out every single piece of your grandmother's junk. The piano, the furniture, the photo albums. They offered me $3,000 for the lot, and I took it. We need the cash to help Vanessa make her minimum payments. My mother chimed back, in her voice dripping with venom. You brought this on yourself, Valerie. You are a cold-blooded, useless daughter. You care more about your stupid computer programs than your own blood. If you want to save that old junk, you have until noon to wire $10,000 into my checking account. That will cover the loan interest and Vanessa's immediate debts. You wire the money, or everything your grandmother ever owned goes to a landfill today. They were holding my history hostage. They were leveraging the only pure, untainted memories of my childhood to extort capital they could funnel directly to my abuser. They knew the emotional value of those journals. They knew what that piano meant to me. They were attempting to break my spirit by destroying the last physical evidence that I had ever been loved. They expected me to panic. They expected me to cry, to beg, to frantically promise to find the money. They expected the compliant, invisible daughter to finally surrender. I looked at the finalized Vanguard acquisition term sheet glowing on my monitor. $40 million. Are you absolutely certain about this decision? I asked. My voice was a void. No anger, no tears, no hesitation. Just a flat, unyielding question. Wire the money. Valerie, or the unit gets emptied. My father threatened one last time, mistaking my calm for submission. You have until noon. The line went dead with a sharp click. I placed the receiver back onto the cradle. I did not cry. I did not throw anything. I felt a profound, absolute detachment from the people who shared my DNA. The emotional tether had not just frayed. It had been cleanly, surgically severed. I picked up my cell phone and dialed David Sterling. He answered on the first ring. Sterling, I said, matching his professional cadence. The Vanguard term sheet includes a standard good faith deposit clause upon the acceptance of the preliminary terms. It does. Sterling confirmed the rustle of papers audible in the background. $1 million in non-refundable earnest money held in escrow until the final signing on Monday. It is designed to prove they have the liquidity and are committed to the integration timeline. I need you to authorize an immediate partial release of those funds from escrow into my personal operating account. I instructed, checking the clock on my wall. It was 10:15 in the morning. I need $50,000 cleared and accessible within the next 30 minutes. Sterling paused. Valerie drawing from the earnest money before the final execution is highly unorthodox. The buyers will receive an automated notification of the transfer. Julian will see the funds move.
"I do not care if Julian sees the funds move," I stated, my eyes locking onto the Chicago traffic moving sluggishly on the street below. I is desperate enough to ignore a minor accounting anomaly to secure the software. "I need that capital immediately, Sterling." "Is there a corporate emergency?" he asked, his tone shifting into protective legal mode. "There is a hostile liquidation occurring at noon," I replied, picking up my car keys from the desk. "I need to purchase a commercial storage facility before my parents throw my grandmother's legacy into a dumpster." Sterling did not ask any further questions. He understood the urgency of tone, if not the specific details. "Consider the funds transferred. You will have access by 10:45. I hung up the phone. I grabbed my wool coat and walked out of my office. My parents thought they could weaponize $10,000 to force my compliance. They had no idea they had just triggered the financial resources of a $40 million tech acquisition. I was not going to negotiate with a liquidator. I was going to buy the entire building. I did not drive to the storage facility in a panic. I drove with the precision of an auditor executing a targeted seizure. While navigating the sluggish late-morning traffic on the Kennedy Expressway, I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth and contacted a premium logistics and relocation firm. I did not hire 2 men with a rented van. I hired a specialized team of bonded movers who primarily handled fine art and high-value estates. I authorized a premium rush fee, paying them directly from the Vanguard earnest money that had just cleared into my account. I arrived at the commercial storage facility at 11:15. The sky was an unforgiving flat gray. The sprawling climate-controlled warehouse sat behind a heavy chain-link fence. I parked my car near the main office and waited. 10 minutes later, 2 pristine white moving trucks pulled through the gates. A team of 6 uniformed professionals stepped out. I walked over to the facility manager's office, bypassing the front desk and knocking directly on the manager's glass door. I presented my identification and a notarized copy of my grandmother's original will, which explicitly designated me as the sole inheritor of her personal effects. My parents had maintained the lease on the unit, but they did not legally own the contents inside it. The manager, a pragmatic woman who wanted no part in a familial legal dispute, verified the documents and handed me the master access code. We bypassed my parents entirely. My team reached Unit 408 just as a battered, unmarked box truck pulled into the parking lot. 2 men in dirty work clothes stepped out carrying a clipboard. My parents' liquidators had arrived. They were 15 minutes too late. I stood by the rolling steel door of the unit as my team carefully wrapped my grandmother's antique piano in thick protective moving blankets. They boxed her handwritten journals into reinforced crates. They handled her photo albums with white gloves. I watched the liquidators approach their expressions, shifting from annoyance to confusion as they saw the massive professional operation already underway. "Hey," one of the men shouted, waving his clipboard. "We have a work order from Richard Evans to clear this unit. The contents of this unit belong to the estate of Margaret Evans," I stated loudly, keeping my posture rigid. "I am the sole legal beneficiary. The items are currently being relocated. If you attempt to interfere with the transfer of these assets, I will have my corporate attorney file charges for attempted theft against your company." The liquidator looked at me, looked at the 6 broad-shouldered movers loading the piano, and looked down at his clipboard. He did not get paid enough to fight a legal battle over old furniture. He muttered a curse, turned around, and walked back to his truck. I watched them drive away. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my father. He had undoubtedly received an angry phone call from his thwarted liquidator. I did not answer. I blocked his number. The defensive perimeter was secure. The hostages had been rescued. Now it was time to transition to a full aggressive offensive. I followed the moving trucks to a newly leased secure storage facility closer to my apartment. I watched the team carefully unload and catalog every item. My grandmother's legacy was safe. The emotional leverage my family had wielded over me for decades was completely neutralized. I returned to Sterling's law office at 2:00 in the afternoon. The atmosphere in the conference room was crackling with the electric tension of an imminent high-stakes closure. Sterling had printed the massive, heavily redacted master acquisition contract for Vanguard Equity. Julian's legal team had returned the draft within 2 hours. They were moving at a desperate, frantic pace, abandoning standard due diligence protocols to secure the Nexus Logic software before the end of their fiscal quarter.
I sat down at the mahogany conference table. Sterling slid a silver pen across the wood toward me. They accepted the $40 million valuation without a single counteroffer. Sterling reported, adjusting his glasses. They agreed to the in-person meeting on Monday morning. They are bleeding cash so rapidly that their legal department is rubber-stamping our demands just to get the code integration started. I looked at the thick stack of legal documents. Julian thought he was bullying a desperate, unsophisticated tech founder into a rapid sale. He believed his aggressive emails and threats of litigation had forced my hand. He was completely blind to the fact that he was enthusiastically walking into an execution chamber. "I need to add one final rider to the employment transition clause," I said, setting the pen down and looking at my attorney. Sterling frowned slightly. "Valerie, adding clauses this late in the negotiation risks spooking the buyers. They are desperate, but they are not stupid." "They will not spook," I assured him. "Julian's neck is on the chopping block. He will sign anything that guarantees the software delivery." I leaned forward, detailing the exact legal trap I wanted to set. "Draft a clause stipulating that upon the successful acquisition of Nexus Logic, the Vanguard Executive Board must publicly acknowledge the operational strategy of the founder during the transition phase. Furthermore, the clause must grant the founder unilateral binding authority to review and terminate any Vanguard project personnel deemed detrimental to the software integration process." Sterling stopped writing on his legal pad. He looked up, his eyes widening as he grasped the lethal implication of the clause. "You want the contractual right to fire the Vanguard executives managing the acquisition. I want the contractual right to fire Julian Hayes the moment the ink is dry," I corrected him, my voice devoid of any hesitation. Sterling let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "It is a highly irregular demand for an acquisition contract. Usually the purchasing firm retains absolute control over personnel. Frame it as a quality assurance requirement," I instructed, leaning back in my chair. "State that the founder's proprietary algorithm requires a specific collaborative management style to function correctly. Tell them the founder refuses to hand over the source code if they are forced to work with hostile or incompetent project directors. Julian's own abusive emails to you will serve as the justification for the clause." Sterling nodded, his pen flying across the pad. "Their legal team will flag it, but Julian will force them to accept it. He is too arrogant to believe a nameless software developer would ever have the power or the audacity to target him specifically. He will assume the clause is aimed at lower-level IT managers. Send the revision immediately," I commanded. "Tell them this is the absolute final condition for the Monday morning signing." Sterling drafted the rider and sent it to Vanguard's legal department while I waited in his office. We sat in silence, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the room. The waiting was the most agonizing part of the hunt. 45 minutes later, Sterling's computer chimed. He opened the email and scanned the attached document. A slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. "They accepted the rider," Sterling announced, turning his monitor so I could see the digital signatures. "Julian Hayes personally initialed the approval on behalf of the Vanguard acquisition team. He just legally authorized you to terminate his employment." I looked at Julian's digital signature on the screen. The arrogant, condescending brother-in-law who had mocked my career, demanded my servitude, and enabled the destruction of my family had just eagerly signed his own death warrant. The net was fully drawn. The pieces were all on the board. Now I just needed to make a final, highly visible appearance in his world before I destroyed it entirely. I needed a dress. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Chicago was a masterclass in corporate opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over hundreds of executives mingling in bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne and caviar. This was the Vanguard Equity Annual Charity Gala, a highly exclusive event where the city's financial elite gathered to network secure investments and subtly measure their wealth against one another. It was Julian's territory. It was the exact room where Vanessa had demanded I serve as a glorified coat check girl. I did not enter through the service doors. I arrived at 8 o'clock in the evening, stepping out of a black town car at the main entrance. I handed my coat to the valet and walked toward the grand staircase. I wore a tailored floor-length emerald green gown. The lines were sharp, minimalist, and undeniably expensive. My hair was pulled back into a sleek chignon,
and I wore no jewelry other than a pair of simple diamond studs. I did not look like the beleaguered sister-in-law who washed dishes while her family mocked her. I looked like a woman who owned the room. I approached the velvet ropes cordoning off the VIP entrance. A sharply dressed event coordinator with an iPad blocked my path. "Name, please," she asked, offering a polite but dismissive smile, clearly not recognizing me as a regular attendee. "Valerie Evans," I replied, my voice steady. She swiped a manicured finger across her screen. Her polite smile faltered, replaced by a look of sudden respectful deference. "Ah, yes, Ms. Evans, a platinum-tier benefactor ticket. Please write this way." I had used a fraction of the Vanguard earnest money to purchase the $5,000 anonymous VIP ticket through a corporate proxy earlier that week. I bypassed the standard entry line and walked directly into the heart of the ballroom. The air hummed with the quiet, intense energy of high-stakes networking. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and positioned myself near a towering floral arrangement observing the ecosystem. It took me less than 3 minutes to spot Julian. He was holding court near the center of the room, standing in a tight circle with 3 older men I recognized immediately. They were the senior members of the Vanguard Equity Board of Directors. Julian was laughing loudly at a joke, swirling a glass of amber liquid, radiating the obnoxious confidence of a man who believed he was invincible. Vanessa stood silently beside him, wearing a restrictive, glittering gown, smiling vacantly at men who did not even acknowledge her presence. I took a slow sip of my champagne and took a deliberate step out from behind the floral arrangement, placing myself directly in his line of sight. It happened exactly as I anticipated. Julian's gaze swept across the room and locked onto me. His loud laugh died instantly in his throat. The smug, relaxed posture of the senior partner vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. He blinked rapidly, clearly convinced he was hallucinating. He looked at my designer gown. He looked at the glass of premium champagne in my hand, and then his shock metastasized into furious, blinding rage. He muttered a quick excuse to the board members and marched across the ballroom toward me, his heavy footsteps cutting through the elegant atmosphere. Vanessa trailed behind him, her eyes wide with mounting panic as she realized who her husband was approaching. "What the hell are you doing here?" Julian hissed, coming to a halt just inches from my face. His voice was low, vibrating with suppressed violence, desperate to avoid causing a scene while simultaneously attempting to crush me. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin through the silk of my dress. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply looked down at his hand gripping my arm and then looked back up into his furious eyes. "Release my arm, Julian," I commanded quietly. The icy detachment in my voice momentarily derailed his anger. He let go, but stepped closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "How did you get in here?" he demanded, a vein pulsing visibly in his neck. "Did you sneak in through the kitchens? Are you trying to embarrass me in front of my board?" "I bought a ticket," I replied, taking another sip of champagne. "It is a charity gala." I felt philanthropic. Vanessa arrived at his side, her face flushed with humiliation and fear. "Valerie, are you out of your mind?" she whispered frantically, glancing around to see who was watching. "You cannot be here. Look at you. Who paid for that dress?" "Did you steal a credit card?" Julian did not wait for my answer. His narcissistic rage completely overpowered his professional decorum. He could not tolerate the idea that the woman he viewed as a pathetic failure had infiltrated his sanctuary of wealth. He needed to establish his dominance, and he needed an audience to witness it. "Security," Julian barked, raising his hand and signaling to 2 large men in black suits standing near the exit. The loud command drew the attention of several nearby guests. Conversations paused, heads turned. The elegant hum of the ballroom ground to a halt as the elite crowd turned their gaze toward the sudden disruption. Julian stepped back, projecting his voice, so the surrounding executives, including his board members, could hear every word. "I need this woman removed from the premises immediately," Julian announced, pointing a rigid finger at me. "She is a disturbed individual. She is my wife's estranged sister. She has a history of severe mental instability, and she has been stalking my family. She does not belong here." A murmur of shocked whispers rippled through the crowd. Vanessa covered her mouth, playing the role of the traumatized victim perfectly. The two security guards pushed through the crowd, their expressions stern and uncompromising. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the lead guard said, reaching for my arm. I stood my ground. The humiliation was designed to break me, to force me into a hysterical defense that would only prove his accusations of instability. Julian stood there, a triumphant smirk returning to his face, believing he had successfully neutralized the threat and reasserted his absolute authority. He waited for me to cry. He waited for me to be dragged out in disgrace. I did not say a single word. I simply looked past Julian's shoulder, focusing my attention on a figure emerging from the crowd. The counterstrike I had meticulously planned was about to arrive, and it was going to come from a direction Julian could never have anticipated. The security guard's hand was mere inches from my arm when a voice cut through the tense silence of the ballroom. "Remove your hand from her arm immediately." The voice was not loud, but it carried the undeniable gravitational weight of absolute authority. The kind of authority that does not need to shout to be obeyed. The security guard froze. He quickly stepped back, his hands retreating to his sides. Julian's triumphant smirk vanished. He spun around to identify the source of the command. The crowd of executives parted seamlessly, revealing a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a meticulously tailored midnight blue tuxedo. It was Richard Vance. Richard Vance was not merely a wealthy attendee. He was a billionaire venture capitalist and the founding chairman of the Supreme Board of Directors for Vanguard Equity. He was the apex predator of the Chicago financial district. He was Julian's ultimate boss. More importantly to me, Richard Vance was the silent initial angel investor who had provided the seed capital for Nexus Logic 3 years ago. He was the only person in this room who knew exactly what I had built and exactly how much it was worth. Vance walked directly toward me, completely ignoring Julian's bewildered presence. He extended his hand, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his formidable features. "Valerie," he said, his voice echoing clearly in the quiet ballroom. "It is an absolute honor that you accepted my personal invitation this evening. We are thrilled to have you here." I took his hand, returning his firm handshake with steady confidence. "The pleasure is mine, Richard. Thank you for the generous accommodation." The collective gasp from the surrounding crowd was palpable. Hundreds of elite executives who just seconds ago believed they were witnessing the removal of a deranged stalker were now watching their chairman greet that same woman with profound public reverence. Julian stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar. His brain short-circuited as he desperately tried to process the impossible scene unfolding in front of him. The sister-in-law he had just publicly labeled a worthless, unstable leech was currently exchanging pleasantries with the most powerful man in his corporate universe. "Mr. Vance," Julian stammered, his voice cracking, devoid of its usual arrogant baritone. "You know her, sir. This woman is my wife's estranged sister. She is unemployed. She is a massive liability. I was just trying to protect the integrity of the event." Vance turned his head slowly. He looked at Julian with the cold, detached expression of a man assessing a structural defect in a building he is about to demolish. "I have absolutely no idea what delusion you are currently operating under." Julian Vance stated, his tone chillingly flat. He gestured respectfully toward me. "This is Valerie Evans. She is one of the most brilliant software architects I have had the privilege of backing in the last decade. She is also the founder and chief executive officer of the company currently preparing to save your failing logistics division from complete insolvency." The silence in the ballroom deepened into a suffocating vacuum. Vanessa swayed slightly on her heels, clutching Julian's arm for physical support. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically between me and the chairman. The reality of my wealth, the reality of my power was crashing down upon her artificial world. Julian's face drained of color. He looked like a man who had just stepped onto a landmine and heard the click. He realized in front of his board of directors and hundreds of his peers that the anonymous genius he had been desperately negotiating with all week was the woman he had ordered to clean his patio. "Sir, I did not know," Julian rasped, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning of the ballroom. "I had no idea she was the founder of Nexus Logic. The broker agreement was blind. Ignorance is a very poor defense for gross unprofessionalism." Vance reprimanded him, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. If you ever speak to our most critical acquisition partner with that level of disrespect, again I will personally ensure a motion is brought before the board to strip you of your partnership and remove you from this firm entirely. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir, Julian whispered, his head bowing in total submission. Vance held Julian's gaze for another long, agonizing second before turning back to me, his warm smile returning instantly. Shall we discuss the integration timeline over a drink? Valerie Vance offered, offering his arm. I believe the private lounge is much quieter. I would love that, Richard, I replied. I took his arm and walked away. I did not look back at Julian. I did not look back at Vanessa. I left them standing in the center of the ballroom, completely humiliated, utterly defeated, and surrounded by the whispering judgment of the very society they had worshipped. The trap had sprung, but the true execution was still scheduled for Monday morning. The persistent, aggressive pounding on my apartment door started at 7:30 on Sunday morning. It was not a polite knock. It was the frantic, desperate hammering of people who believed their demands superseded any basic boundaries. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, reviewing the finalized contract addendums for the Vanguard acquisition. I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door. I walked down the narrow hallway and unlocked the deadbolt. I pulled the door open, keeping the security chain engaged. My mother, my father, and Vanessa stood in the poorly lit corridor. They looked disheveled, entirely stripped of the country club veneer they wore so proudly the night before. Vanessa's eyes were bloodshot and swollen from crying. My father's face was dark with unbridled rage. My mother looked frantic, her hands twisting nervously around the strap of her purse. Open this door right now, Valerie, my father commanded, his voice, a harsh, echoing bark in the quiet hallway. I did not move to unlatch the chain. I remained standing in the narrow opening, looking at them with a flat, detached expression. State your business. I am busy, I replied smoothly. Vanessa pushed past our parents, pressing her tear-stained face near the gap in the door. You ruined my life, she shrieked, her voice cracking. Julian came home last night and lost his mind. He screamed at me for 2 hours. He said you humiliated him in front of the chairman. He is blaming me for the entire incident. He threatened to file for divorce on Monday morning. He is cutting off my credit cards. He is canceling the allowance he sends Mom and Dad. We are going to lose everything because of you. My mother shoved Vanessa aside, her face contorted with a desperate, vicious panic. You malicious, vindictive girl, she hissed. You engineered this entire spectacle just to destroy your sister's marriage. You think because you manipulated some wealthy investor into backing your little computer project that you are untouchable. You are a fraud, Valerie. You just got lucky by latching onto Richard Vance's coattails. My father slammed his open palm against the doorframe, making the wood rattle. You are going to fix this, he ordered, his eyes wide and furious. You are going to call Julian right now. You are going to get down on your knees and apologize for disrespecting him. You will tell him that Vanessa had nothing to do with your psychotic behavior. You will fix this family. I stared at the three of them. They had spent my entire life prioritizing Vanessa's artificial comfort over my basic dignity. They had mortgaged my grandmother's legacy to pay for her designer handbags. They had threatened to burn the only memories of the woman who loved me simply because I refused to act as their unpaid servant. And now, even when faced with the undeniable reality of my success, their immediate reaction was not pride or apologies. It was a vicious demand that I humiliate myself to preserve the fragile, toxic ecosystem they relied upon. They did not care about the truth. They only cared about the leverage Julian provided. You think I am destroying this family? I asked, my voice deadly quiet, devoid of any anger or sorrow. You are actively trying to bankrupt us, my father roared. If Julian cuts us off, we lose the commercial loan, we lose the storage unit, we lose everything. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper. I slid it through the crack in the door, holding it out toward my father. He snatched it aggressively, unfolding it with trembling hands. My mother and Vanessa leaned in to read it over his shoulder. It was a certified receipt from a premium logistics and relocation firm. Attached to it was a notarized copy of a new fully paid 5-year lease for a high-security climate-controlled storage facility located in the South Loop. What is this? My father demanded, his eyes darting across the numbers. "That is the receipt for the extraction of my grandmother's belongings," I explained, maintaining my cold, unyielding tone. "I hired a specialized moving team yesterday morning. I bypassed your liquidators entirely. Every journal, every photo album, and the grand piano are safely secured in a facility registered under my corporate LLC." My mother gasped, stepping back as the realization hit her. "You moved everything. I paid off your leverage," I stated flatly. "You no longer possess anything that I value. You have absolutely nothing left to threaten me with." "Valerie, you cannot do this," Vanessa sobbed, reaching out to grasp the edge of the door. "Please, if Julian divorces me, I have nothing. I cannot go back to a normal job. You have to talk to him. You have to save my marriage." I looked at my sister, feeling a profound, chilling detachment. "I am not responsible for saving a marriage built on financial fraud and emotional abuse, Vanessa. You chose a man who treats people like garbage. Now you get to experience what it is like when he turns that garbage disposal on you." I reached out and grabbed the door handle, preparing to close it. "You are a monster," my mother screamed, tears of rage finally spilling down her cheeks. "You are a cold, heartless monster. You are dead to us, Valerie. Do you hear me? You are no longer our daughter." I looked at her one last time. I felt the final fragile thread of familial obligation snap cleanly in two. "I have not been your daughter for a very long time," I said. "And tomorrow morning you are going to find out exactly how much destruction a monster can cause when she finally stops holding back." I shoved the door closed. The heavy deadbolt engaged with a loud final click. I ignored the frantic pounding and the muffled screaming that continued in the hallway for another 10 minutes. I walked back to my kitchen island, picked up my coffee, and opened my laptop. I had a $40 million corporate execution to prepare for. The Vanguard Equity headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek steel and glass skyscraper in the heart of Chicago's financial district. It was an intimidating fortress of wealth designed specifically to make visitors feel small. The executive boardroom on the 50th floor was the crown jewel of the firm. It featured a massive polished mahogany table, ergonomic leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying view of the sprawling city below. At 8:45 on Monday morning, the atmosphere inside that boardroom was not triumphant. It was toxic with suppressed panic. Julian Hayes sat near the head of the table. He wore a pristine charcoal gray suit, but the collar of his shirt felt uncomfortably tight. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. He checked his gold-plated watch for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Sitting across from him were 3 senior managing directors and the chief financial officer of Vanguard Equity. At the absolute head of the table sat Richard Vance, the billionaire chairman of the board. Vance's presence alone was enough to elevate the blood pressure of everyone in the room. He sat in silence, reading a digital report on his tablet, radiating a cold, unyielding authority. Julian was terrified. He had spent the entire weekend desperately trying to secure the Nexus Logic acquisition. The distressed subsidiary Apex Logistics had suffered another catastrophic server failure on Sunday night, bleeding an estimated $500,000 in misrouted freight. The bleeding had to stop today. If the anonymous tech founder walked away from the $40 million deal, Vance had made it explicitly clear during a brutal morning briefing that Julian would be terminated immediately. His partnership, his equity, his entire elite lifestyle were hanging by a thread. He needed this software. He needed this faceless CEO to sign the final contract. Julian took a slow, deep breath, attempting to steady his racing heart. He arranged the thick stack of legal acquisition documents precisely in the center of the table. He placed his expensive Mont Blanc pen next to the signature line. He practiced his most reassuring, confident corporate smile. He was ready to charm, manipulate, and secure the signature of whatever socially awkward programmer walked through those doors. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. David Sterling, the veteran corporate attorney, stepped into the room first. He wore a sharp navy pinstripe suit and carried his signature black leather briefcase. He projected the quiet, lethal competence that defined his long career. Julian stood up, pasting on his practiced diplomatic smile. "Mr. Sterling, welcome. Thank you for accommodating the expedited timeline. We are thrilled to finally finalize this partnership." Sterling did not return the smile. He simply nodded and stepped aside, clearing the doorway. Allow me to introduce the founder and chief executive officer of Nexus Logic.
Sterling announced, his voice echoing cleanly in the vast boardroom. I walked into the room. I wore a tailored, stark white suit that cut a sharp, commanding silhouette against the dark wood of the boardroom. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, professional chignon. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor with slow, deliberate precision. I did not look like an exhausted sister-in-law. I did not look like a woman who had been bullied at a Thanksgiving table. I looked like an apex predator stepping into a cage. I stopped at the edge of the mahogany table. Julian's diplomatic smile froze. The color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen hue. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound emerged. His eyes bulged, darting wildly from my face to the white suit, then to Sterling and back to my face. The heavy Mont Blanc pen slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering loudly onto the polished wood and rolling off the edge of the table onto the floor. The 3 senior managing directors stared at me in profound confusion, recognizing me from the chaotic scene at the charity gala 2 nights prior. They glanced nervously at Julian, waiting for an explanation that he was fundamentally incapable of providing. Richard Vance, however, simply set his tablet down and offered a small, knowing smile. Valerie Vance greeted me, his voice warm and respectful. "It is a pleasure to see you again so soon. Please have a seat." "Thank you, Richard," I replied smoothly. I pulled out the leather chair directly across from Julian and sat down. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table. I looked directly into Julian's terrified, unblinking eyes. "Good morning, Julian," I said. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. "Are you ready to discuss the future of your career?" Julian sprang to his feet. His palms hit the polished mahogany table with a sharp, echoing crack. The veneer of the elite senior partner vanished, replaced by the frantic, unhinged energy of a man losing his grip on reality. "What are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice cracking, shedding its usual smooth baritone. He glared at me, then frantically turned his attention to the 3 managing directors sitting across from him. "Security. Get building security up here right now. This woman is stalking me. She followed me from the gala to my own office. She is delusional." The executives exchanged alarmed glances. The chief financial officer reached toward the silver phone console in the center of the table, his fingers hovering over the emergency dial button. He looked at Julian, a man renowned for his icy, detached negotiation tactics, currently unraveling like an amateur facing his first audit. "Julian, sit down and lower your voice," the CFO hissed, glancing nervously at Richard Vance, who remained perfectly still at the head of the table. "We are expecting a critical vendor. You are going to blow the acquisition if they walk in and see you having a meltdown over a family dispute." "She is the dispute," Julian snarled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "She is my wife's sister. She has no business being in a restricted corporate sector. She sneaked into the charity gala this weekend to harass me, and now she is trying to sabotage my career. Have her removed." I did not break eye contact. I did not flinch at his shouting. I sat in my ergonomic leather chair, my posture immaculate in my white tailored suit. I waited. David Sterling stepped forward, breaking the chaotic tension. He did not raise his voice to compete with Julian. He simply unclasped his black leather briefcase. The dull metallic snap of the latches drew the eyes of every man in the room. Sterling reached inside and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. He placed them squarely on the center of the mahogany table right next to the finalized acquisition contract Julian had prepared. "Gentlemen," Sterling announced, his tone dripping with professional disdain, "there is no security breach. There is no sabotage. Allow me to formally introduce my client." Sterling slid the first document across the wood. It was the Articles of Incorporation for Nexus Logic, bearing the official seal of the state. He slid the second document forward. It was the sole patent registration for the logistics algorithm Vanguard Equity was currently bleeding cash to acquire. He placed a third document on top. The capitalization table. "This is Valerie Sterling," stated his words, landing like heavy stones in the silent room. "She is the sole founder, the chief software architect, and the chief executive officer of Nexus Logic. She owns 100% of the equity you are attempting to purchase today." The blood drained from Julian's face in one sudden, horrifying rush. His skin turned a sickly ashen gray. His knees buckled beneath him. He fell backward, his weight landing heavily in his chair. The leather groaned under the sudden impact. He stared at the documents Sterling had arrayed on the table, his eyes locked onto the stark black ink signatures at the bottom of each page. My signature. Julian's mouth opened, but his vocal cords refused to function. He looked at me. He looked at the white suit. He looked at the confident, unyielding expression on my face. The cognitive dissonance was breaking his mind. He tried to reconcile the image of the woman he had ordered to scrub his patio tiles with the woman sitting across from him, holding a $40 million gun to his head. The cute little app he had mocked over turkey and bourbon was not a hobby. It was the digital behemoth that had brought a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm to its knees. The unemployed leech he had berated in his kitchen was the elusive tech genius he had spent the entire weekend begging for salvation. He realized in a wave of suffocating terror that every arrogant email he had sent to the blind broker, every aggressive threat he had made to force the sale, had been delivered directly into my inbox. I had read every word. I had held his career in the palm of my hand while he stood in my parents' house and called me a failure. The three managing directors stared at me in stunned silence. The CFO slowly pulled his hand away from the phone console, looking from the incorporation papers to Julian's pale, sweating face. The realization that their lead negotiator had a deeply toxic personal history with their most vital acquisition target sent a shockwave of panic through the Vanguard executives. Richard Vance broke the silence. The billionaire chairman leaned forward, resting his forearms on the edge of the granite table. The ambient temperature in the boardroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julian Vance said, his voice a low, lethal rumble that commanded immediate, terrified attention. Julian flinched, his eyes darting toward the chairman. "Sir," he managed to choke out, "did you just demand that my security team drag the architect of our corporate salvation out of my boardroom?" Vance asked, his gaze boring into Julian with the intensity of a predator studying a wounded animal. "Did you just refer to the most crucial partner this firm has engaged this year as a crazy stalker?" Julian swallowed hard. A bead of sweat dripped down his temple, staining the pristine collar of his custom shirt. "Mr. Vance, I had no idea," he stammered, his hands shaking as he gripped the armrests of his chair. "The broker agreement was strict. The identity was redacted. She is my sister-in-law. We have a complicated family dynamic. I did not know she was the developer. Your ignorance is staggering, but it is not an excuse for your lack of professional composure," Vance reprimanded him, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "You are a senior partner at this firm. You conduct yourself with dignity, or you leave the premises. If you ever speak to a visiting executive with that level of derision again, you will be emptying your desk before lunch." Julian lowered his head, staring at the mahogany grain. "Yes, sir. I apologize, sir. It will not happen again." He was a broken man. The arrogance that defined his existence had been shattered into pieces, swept away by the brutal reality of his own vulnerability. He was sitting in his own boardroom, reprimanded by his idol, entirely dependent on the mercy of the woman he despised. I did not let the silence linger. I took control of the meeting. I reached forward and pulled the thick stack of acquisition contracts closer to my side of the table. I picked up the expensive Mont Blanc pen Julian had dropped earlier. I wiped the gold barrel with a small tissue from my pocket, ensuring it was clean, and placed it deliberately next to the signature line on the final page. I leaned back, crossing my legs, projecting the calm, relaxed authority of a CEO who already owned the room. I looked directly into Julian's red, exhausted eyes. "Hello, brother-in-law," I said, offering a cool, detached smile. Julian visibly shuddered at the greeting. He could not form a response. He simply stared at me, trapped in a nightmare of his own making. "I believe you mentioned earlier that this cute little app was a dead end," I remarked, keeping my voice conversational, ensuring the board members heard every word. "I suppose $40 million is a rather generous valuation for a hobby. Do you still think I need to find a real job, Julian, or shall we skip the career advice and get down to business?" The CFO grimaced, looking away. Vance watched me with quiet approval. Julian remained paralyzed, the weight of the contract sitting between us like an executioner's block. The execution had commenced, and I had not even picked up the pen. The heavy silence in the boardroom was absolute. Julian sat frozen in his leather chair, a man waiting for a blow he could not deflect. I did not raise my voice. I did not indulge in the petty vindictiveness he had weaponized against me at the Thanksgiving table.
I let the legal architecture I had built execute the strike for me. I opened the thick black folder resting on the mahogany table. I bypassed the main $40 million acquisition contract and extracted a thin 3-page document. I slid it across the polished wood toward the center of the table, placing it equidistant between the chief financial officer and Richard Vance. Before we finalize the asset transfer and execute the signatures, I require the immediate activation of the personnel restructuring rider. I announced, my voice carrying the crisp, uncompromising clarity of a corporate auditor. Julian's eyes darted toward the document. The confusion in his gaze lasted only a second before the realization hit him. The addendum. The peculiar clause he had frantically signed off on late Friday afternoon to keep the blind broker from walking away. The CFO picked up the document, adjusting his glasses to review the text. The Vanguard legal team approved this rider regarding quality assurance and integration management. He noted, his tone cautious. It grants the founder unilateral authority to remove any Vanguard project personnel deemed detrimental to the software transition. He looked up at me. Are you anticipating a conflict with our integration team, Ms. Evans? I am terminating a conflict before it jeopardizes the architecture, I replied. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a slim silver remote. I aimed it at the massive flat-screen display mounted on the far wall of the boardroom. The screen flared to life, casting a stark white glow over the somber executives. I did not project financial charts or algorithmic flow models. I projected a series of emails. These are the official communications your lead acquisitions director sent to my legal counsel during the negotiation phase, I stated, clicking the remote to highlight specific paragraphs. The emails Julian had sent over the weekend dominated the screen in massive, damning font. Tell the developer to stop playing games and sign the contract, or I will personally ensure they never secure funding in this city again. I will bankrupt their little operation through litigation. Vanguard Equity does not wait on boutique startup founders. The 3 managing directors stared at the screen, their expressions shifting from uncomfortable to horrified. This was not aggressive negotiation. This was blatant corporate bullying, borderline extortion, heavily documented on official company servers. In the modern corporate ecosystem, leaving a paper trail of threats against a vital tech founder was an invitation for a massive, catastrophic lawsuit. Julian, what the hell is this? The CFO demanded, his voice sharp with reprimand. You threatened to bankrupt a $40 million acquisition target in writing. Julian opened his mouth, stammering, searching for a defense that did not exist. I was applying pressure. He choked out, his face slick with sweat. The integration timeline was critical. I was protecting the firm's interests. You were exposing the firm to severe legal liability, I corrected him, keeping my focus locked on Richard Vance. I clicked the remote again. The screen shifted from the abusive emails to a clean, detailed operational timeline. It tracked the performance metrics of Apex Logistics over the past 6 months, directly correlating the escalating financial losses with the specific management decisions implemented by Julian Hayes. Your lead director is not a logistics expert. He is an aggressive opportunist, I explained, delivering the final fatal assessment of his professional competence. He alienated the legacy IT staff at Apex, delayed critical server upgrades to hit arbitrary budget targets, and caused the massive routing failures you are currently paying me to fix. His management style relies entirely on intimidation and coercion traits that are fundamentally incompatible with the collaborative engineering required to integrate Nexus logic into your failing systems. I placed the remote back on the table. I folded my hands and looked at the men sitting across from me. Vanguard Equity can purchase my company today, I stated smoothly. The $40 million valuation stands. But my continued cooperation during the transition phase requires the immediate activation of the personnel rider. I refuse to work with a project director who lacks basic logistical competence, possesses zero professional ethics, and actively threatens my legal counsel. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with Julian. He looked small. He looked utterly deflated, stripped of the unearned arrogance that had defined his entire existence. Julian Hayes is a toxic liability to this integration, I concluded. I want him removed from the acquisition team. The room held its breath. Julian looked frantically toward the CFO, then toward the managing directors, his eyes begging for a lifeline, an objection, a defense of his seniority. They offered him nothing.
The financial reality was inescapable. They needed the software. They did not need Julian. Richard Vance broke the silence. The chairman of the board did not raise his voice. He did not shout or pound his fist on the table. He simply delivered a verdict. The acquisition of Nexus Logic is critical to the survival of our logistics division. Vance stated, his tone devoid of any sympathy. Ms. Evans's software is the only viable solution on the market. If she requires a change in project leadership to ensure a successful integration, we will accommodate that requirement without hesitation. Julian's chest heaved. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. Mr. Vance, I sourced this deal. I negotiated the terms. I brought her to the table. You cannot just remove me from the project. This acquisition is my primary quarterly deliverable. Vance looked at Julian with an expression of profound, icy disgust. You did not source this deal, Julian. You blundered into it, bullied the founder in writing, and nearly cost us a $40 million asset because you lack the basic professional discipline required of a senior partner. You are not just being removed from the acquisition project. The chairman paused, allowing the weight of his next words to settle over the terrified executive. Your behavior is a severe violation of this firm's ethical guidelines and a direct threat to our corporate reputation. You are a liability we can no longer afford to carry. Julian froze. The air left his lungs in a sharp, audible gasp. You are terminated, Julian Vance commanded, delivering the final crushing blow. Effective immediately. You will surrender your security badge, your corporate phone, and your firm laptop to the front desk. You are no longer a partner at Vanguard Equity. You will be escorted from the building by security. Julian stared at the chairman, his mind completely incapable of processing the magnitude of his sudden, absolute destruction. 5 minutes ago he was a king. Now he was a trespasser in his own empire. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a frantic, uncomprehending terror. He realized in the most devastating way possible that I had not just defeated him. I had used his own hubris, his own abusive emails, and his own blind ambition to orchestrate his professional execution. He had handed me the very weapon I used to destroy his life. Security Vance requested pressing a button on the conference room console. Please report to the executive boardroom to escort a terminated employee from the premises. Julian did not argue. He did not scream. The arrogance that had fueled his entire life was shattered beyond repair. He slowly stood up from the leather chair. He did not reach for his expensive briefcase. He left the custom Mont Blanc pen lying on the mahogany table. 2 large security guards entered the boardroom. They flanked Julian, their expressions stern and professional. Mr. Hayes, please come with us, the lead guard instructed. Julian did not look back as he was escorted out of the room. The heavy oak doors closed behind him with a soft, final click. I picked up my pen. I pulled the master acquisition contract toward me. I smoothed the thick paper and signed my name on the bottom line. The signature was clean, sharp, and decisive. I pushed the $40 million contract across the table toward the chairman. I believe we have a deal, Mr. Vance, I said, offering a small professional smile. Vance returned the smile. We do, Valerie. Welcome to the team. Let us get to work. The press embargo lifted at 6 o'clock the following morning. By 7:15, the news of the Vanguard Equity acquisition was dominating the digital front pages of the Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, and Bloomberg. The financial media was ravenous for a fresh narrative and the story of a sole female founder quietly building a crucial logistical architecture and forcing a $40 million cash buyout from a major venture capital firm was irresistible. My public relations team, rapidly assembled by Sterling the previous afternoon, had executed the media rollout flawlessly. The articles did not mention Julian Hayes. They did not mention the dramatic boardroom execution or the internal restructuring at Vanguard. They focused entirely on the numbers, the technology, and the founder. Accompanying the articles was a high-resolution photograph taken weeks ago for a small industry publication. I was standing in front of the Chicago skyline, wearing a sharp-tailored blazer, projecting the quiet, unyielding confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she had built. The headline below the photograph was stark and irrefutable. 31-year-old female founder secures $40 million cash acquisition for supply chain startup Nexus Logic. I was sitting at the kitchen island of my small Wicker Park apartment when the news broke. I wore a comfortable gray sweater and held a mug of freshly brewed black coffee. The apartment was quiet, the radiator clanking softly in the background. I opened my laptop and read the headlines confirming the successful deployment of the final phase of my strategy. The immediate silence was a temporary luxury. I knew the shockwaves were currently rippling through the wealthy suburbs of Chicago, crashing violently against the fragile, fabricated realities of my family. Julian Hayes likely read the headline on his smartphone while sitting in the back of an Uber, having been unceremoniously stripped of his corporate vehicle and his prestigious parking spot. He was a disgraced, unemployed man, forced to witness the woman he had relentlessly mocked being publicly heralded as a tech visionary by the very publications he worshipped. Vanessa undoubtedly saw the news while frantically pacing the imported marble floors of her heavily mortgaged estate, dodging calls from the credit card companies Julian had locked her out from paying. She realized in a sudden suffocating wave of panic that the sister she had tried to physically assault and financially ruin was now sitting on $40 million in liquid capital. My parents probably spilled their morning coffee as they read the business section of the Chicago Tribune. The daughter they had deemed a worthless disappointment, the child they had blackmailed with the threat of destroying her grandmother's legacy, was now a multimillionaire. They recognized with absolute, terrifying clarity that they had just aggressively evicted their only viable financial lifeline. At 7:45, my personal cell phone resting face up on the granite counter began to vibrate. I did not reach for it. I simply watched the screen illuminate. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. The phone buzzed relentlessly against the stone counter. It rang through, stopped, and immediately began ringing again. She called 4 times in rapid succession. I did not decline the calls. I let them ring out, allowing the agonizing silence on her end to stretch. At 7:52, the text messages started flooding in. They arrived in a chaotic, desperate barrage, vibrating the phone with frantic urgency. I watched the notifications stack up on the locked screen. My father was the first to text. "Valerie, we saw the news. We are in shock. $40 million. Why did not you tell us? Call me immediately. We need to talk about the family." A second text from him arrived moments later, the tone shifting from demanding to wheedling. "We are so proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew your computer business would take off. Let us celebrate. Dinner is on us tonight. Please call." I took a slow sip of my coffee. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy was staggering. Less than 48 hours ago, he had threatened to throw my grandmother's journals into a dumpster if I did not act as an unpaid maid for Julian. Now he was offering to buy me dinner, desperately trying to rewrite his cruelty as tough love, hoping to secure a seat at the table he thought he owned. The text messages from my father were quickly eclipsed by a barrage of incoming voicemails from Vanessa. The notification icon climbed rapidly. 13712. I reached out and unlocked the phone, tapping the voicemail icon. I selected the most recent message and put it on speakerphone, letting Vanessa's voice fill the quiet kitchen. "Valerie, please pick up the phone," Vanessa sobbed into the receiver. The arrogant, condescending tone she had used her entire life was completely gone, replaced by raw, hysterical panic. "Julian was fired. He came home last night and destroyed the living room. He is blaming you. He said you sabotaged him. He is packing a bag. He is leaving me, Valerie." She paused to take a ragged, desperate breath. The sound of her crying echoed through the small apartment. "He canceled all the accounts," Vanessa wailed. "The credit cards are declined. The bank called this morning about the second mortgage Mom and Dad took out for me. They are going to foreclose. We are going to lose everything. You have to help us. You have $40 million. You can fix this. Please, Valerie. I am your sister. I am sorry about the hard drive. I am sorry about everything. Just please wire the money. I am begging you." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I stared at the phone. For 31 years, I had been conditioned to respond to that specific tone of panic. I had been trained to absorb their crises, to shrink myself to accommodate their mistakes, to endlessly apologize for my own existence just to keep the peace. I felt a brief phantom tug of that old conditioning, a faint echo of the desperate need for their approval. Then I looked at the sleek black hardware of my laptop. I looked at the headlines confirming my success. I remembered the cold, terrifying certainty in my father's voice when he told me I was no longer part of the family because I refused to be a servant. They were not calling because they loved me. They were not calling because they were proud of my achievements. They were calling because the safety net they relied on had violently snapped, and they were plummeting toward the concrete reality of their own disastrous choices. They wanted me to act as their designated shock absorber one last time. I reached out and picked up the cell phone. I opened the settings menu. I navigated to the notifications tab. I scrolled down with a steady, unhesitating finger. I toggled the switch for Do Not Disturb. The frantic buzzing stopped instantly. The screen went dark, plunging the phone back into absolute silence. I set the device back down on the kitchen counter. I picked up my coffee mug, feeling the warmth radiating through the ceramic. I walked over to the window, looking out at the morning commuters bustling along the sidewalks of Wicker Park. The sky was a crisp, clear blue. I took a long, slow sip of the dark roast coffee. The bitter flavor tasted incredibly rich. I had $40 million in liquid capital securing my future. I owned the storage facility housing my grandmother's legacy. I had successfully excised the toxic infection from my life, and I had done it without screaming, without pleading, and without sacrificing a single ounce of my dignity. I smiled, a genuine, quiet expression of profound relief. The execution was complete. The ghosts were silenced. I was finally truly free. The fallout from the Vanguard acquisition afforded me the luxury of immediate expansion. 7 days after the headlines broke, I relocated Nexus Logic from the cramped office above the dry cleaner to a sprawling high-security suite in a newly constructed commercial high-rise in River North. The space featured floor-to-ceiling windows, polished concrete floors, and a dedicated reception area managed by a highly trained administrative team. It was the physical manifestation of $40 million in liquid capital. I was standing near the expansive windows of my corner office, reviewing the integration timeline with Vanguard's new highly competent project management team, when the internal phone lines on my desk began to flash with an urgent red light. I excused myself from the conference call and picked up the receiver. Ms. Evans, my lead receptionist, a sharp woman named Claire, spoke rapidly. I apologize for the interruption, but there is a situation in the lobby. 3 individuals bypassed the ground floor security checkpoint by claiming a severe family emergency. They are currently demanding to see you. They are extremely agitated and refusing to wait for an appointment. I did not need to ask for their names. The audacity of their intrusion was entirely predictable. Do not call building security yet. Claire, I instructed, my voice calm and measured. Escort them into conference room A. I will handle them directly. I ended the call and walked out of my private office. I moved down the quiet, carpeted hallway with deliberate steps. I was not walking into an ambush. I was walking into the final, inevitable reckoning. I pushed open the heavy glass door of conference room A. My parents and Vanessa stood clustered near the center of the room. The polished, affluent veneer they had maintained their entire lives was completely shattered. My father's suit was rumpled. My mother looked frantic, her eyes darting nervously around the luxurious boardroom. Vanessa was a portrait of absolute devastation. The arrogant socialite who had demanded my unpaid labor just 10 days ago was gone. She looked gaunt, her expensive clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Her makeup was absent, revealing dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. When she saw me enter, she let out a jagged, desperate sob and practically threw herself across the room. "Valerie, oh my God, Valerie," Vanessa wailed, collapsing into one of the expensive leather chairs and burying her face in her hands. I did not step forward to comfort her. I remained standing near the head of the long mahogany table, maintaining a strict physical boundary. "State your business," I commanded, stripping all emotion from my voice. My mother rushed forward, her hands clasped together in a grotesque parody of maternal affection. "Valerie, sweetheart, please. You have to listen to us. We are in a terrible crisis." Julian filed for divorce on Wednesday. He locked Vanessa out of the house. He hired ruthless corporate attorneys. They are claiming Vanessa committed financial fraud by hiding her credit card debt, and Julian is using it to deny her any spousal support. My father stepped up beside her, nodding vigorously. "He is trying to leave her with absolutely nothing, Valerie. He is pushing the $50,000 debt entirely onto her.
And because your mother and I used the commercial storage facility as collateral to secure the initial loan to pay her earlier debts, the bank is now threatening to foreclose on our retirement accounts. We are going to lose everything." I looked at the three of them. They had actively enabled Julian's abusive behavior when they believed it secured their social status. They had willingly offered my grandmother's legacy as collateral to fund Vanessa's delusions of grandeur. Now that the consequences of their reckless greed were crashing down upon them, they expected me to simply deploy my capital to shield them from the blast radius. Vanessa looked up from her hands, her face blotchy and desperate. "Valerie, please. You are a multimillionaire now. $40 million. $50,000 is nothing to you. It is pocket change. You could pay off the debt today. You could hire me a decent lawyer. You can save my life. I am your sister. I am begging you." She slipped off the leather chair, dropping to her knees on the plush carpet. The woman who had sneered at my career and attempted to physically destroy my hard drive was now literally kneeling on the floor of my corporate office, sobbing for a financial bailout. "Valerie, we are blood," my mother pleaded, reaching across the mahogany table toward me. "We are family. We always knew you were destined for incredible things. We always believed in you. You are the pride of this family. Please do not turn your back on us when we need you the most." The sheer staggering hypocrisy of her words hung in the air. "We always believed in you." I stared at my mother, remembering the countless times she had dismissed my achievements, mocked my ambitions, and demanded I shrink myself to accommodate Vanessa's ego. I remembered my father threatening to throw my grandmother's journals into a dumpster if I did not act as a servant for the man currently destroying their lives. They did not believe in me. They believed in my bank account. I did not scream. I did not hurl insults. I executed the final maneuver with the cold, precise logic of a forensic accountant balancing a terminal ledger. I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer. I pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. It was not sealed. I tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice trembling as he stared at the envelope. I looked down at Vanessa, who was still kneeling on the floor, and then shifted my gaze to my parents. "That is an itemized invoice," I stated flatly. My mother frowned, confusion masking her desperation. "An invoice for what?" For the past 10 years, I explained, my voice echoing clearly in the silent boardroom. I calculated the fair market value for every hour I spent acting as your unpaid personal assistant. I billed for the weekends I spent organizing your charity galas while Vanessa went to the spa. I billed for the late nights I spent fixing your taxes because you were too cheap to hire a real accountant. I billed for the hours I spent driving Vanessa to her appointments because she deemed public transportation beneath her. I pointed at the thick envelope. I applied a standard corporate consulting rate adjusted for inflation and added compound interest. The total bill for my uncompensated labor and your systemic emotional extortion comes to roughly $250,000. The three of them stared at me in horrified silence. "I am willing to forgive that financial debt entirely." I continued, leaning slightly forward. "However, you still owe me a massive unpayable deficit of basic human respect, and I do not purchase respect with wire transfers. Valerie, you are being completely unreasonable," my father shouted, his panic overriding his attempt at diplomacy. "We are about to be homeless. You have the power to fix this right now. You are acting like a sociopath." "I am acting like the chief executive officer of my own life," I corrected him, my tone hardening into absolute steel. "I am not a bank. I am not a safety net. I am not the designated collateral for your financial incompetence. You enabled a predator because you liked his money, and now you are paying the price. That is not my problem to solve." I turned away from the mahogany table and walked over to the wall-mounted intercom panel. I pressed the button for the front desk. "Claire," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the three people standing in my boardroom. "Send the security detail into conference room A. I have 3 unauthorized visitors who are refusing to vacate the premises." "You cannot do this!" Vanessa screamed, scrambling up from the floor, her face contorted with a mixture of terror and furious entitlement. "We are your family. You cannot just throw us away like garbage." I looked at my older sister, feeling absolutely nothing. "You threw me away a long time ago, Vanessa," I replied softly. "I am just finally taking out the trash." The heavy glass door of Conference Room A swung open before my father could formulate another threat. 3 members of the building private security detail stepped into the room. They wore charcoal suits and earpieces projecting a quiet, unyielding authority. They did not shout. They did not draw weapons. They simply moved with the coordinated efficiency of professionals trained to remove unwanted elements from high-value corporate environments. "Ma am, sir," the lead guard said, addressing my parents. "It is time to leave the floor." My father puffed out his chest, an old reflex from a man used to intimidating waitstaff and retail clerks. "You cannot put your hands on us. We are leaving on our own terms." "Then please walk toward the elevators," the guard replied, his expression remaining entirely neutral. He gestured toward the open door, leaving no room for negotiation. My mother grabbed my father's arm, her face pale and stricken. The artificial country club bravado she had relied on for decades evaporated in the sterile, uncompromising light of an executive boardroom. She looked at me one final time. There were no more tears. There was only the hollow, devastating recognition that the bridge was permanently burned. She had expected a screaming match. She had expected me to defend myself, to argue, to seek their validation. Instead, she received the cold, mechanical dismissal of a chief executive terminating a bad contract. Vanessa did not move. She remained frozen near the mahogany table, staring at the shredded remains of her socialite fantasy. The second guard approached her, placing a firm, guiding hand on her shoulder. "Let us go, miss." Vanessa flinched at the contact. She did not fight back. The fight had been drained out of her the moment she realized my capital was locked away behind legal walls she could never breach. She turned and walked toward the exit. Her shoulders slumped. Her expensive designer coat looked heavy like a shroud. I followed them out of the conference room, maintaining a measured distance. I wanted to oversee the eviction personally. I stood in the corridor and watched my family walk down the long, carpeted hallway. Dozens of my employees, senior engineers, project managers, and administrative staff paused their work to watch the procession. The silence in the office was sharp and observant. My parents and my sister were forced to march past the people I had hired, the empire I had built, stripped of their dignity and exposed as trespassers. They reached the elevator bank. The lead guard swiped his security badge and the steel doors slid open instantly. My father stepped inside, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. My mother followed, pulling her coat tight around her chest. Vanessa stepped in last. She turned around as the doors began to close. She looked down the long corridor and locked eyes with me. I did not offer a parting word. I did not offer a gesture of closure. I simply stood there, my posture flawless, my face a mask of serene detachment. The brushed steel doors slid together, cutting off her face, cutting off her voice, cutting off her access to my life forever. I turned on my heel and walked back to my corner office. I picked up the itemized invoice I had tossed onto the boardroom table, carried it over to the industrial shredder sitting beside my desk, and fed the thick envelope into the machine. The metal blades whirred, reducing 20 pages of uncompensated labor and emotional extortion into tiny, unrecognizable strips of paper. The debt was canceled. The ledger was wiped clean. The fallout over the next 6 months proceeded exactly as the financial models predicted. I did not need to lift a finger to orchestrate their ruin. The momentum of their own reckless decisions carried them straight over the edge. Julian Hayes finalized the divorce with surgical brutality. Without my corporate signature to save his integration project, his reputation at Vanguard Equity remained permanently tarnished. The firm quietly managed him out at the end of the fiscal year, offering a severance package that required a strict non-disclosure agreement. Blacklisted by the top-tier venture capital firms in Chicago, Julian was forced to relocate to a mid-sized market, accepting a role that paid a fraction of his former salary. He shed Vanessa the moment she became a financial liability. Vanessa was left drowning in the toxic debt she had accumulated. The family court judge, reviewing the mountain of forged invoices and hidden credit lines, awarded her zero spousal support. She was forced to vacate the luxury estate in Winnetka. Having never developed a marketable skill or maintained a resume, she ended up working a retail job at a suburban mall, renting a cramped apartment she could barely afford. The designer handbags she had prized above human connection were sold to consignment shops to cover her utility bills. My parents lost the commercial storage unit first. When they defaulted on the high-interest loan, the bank seized the facility.
The liquidators arrived expecting to find valuable antiques, only to discover an empty concrete room. I had already secured my grandmother's legacy. With no collateral left to auction, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on my parents' retirement home. The sprawling house where I had grown up, the house where I was taught to be invisible, was sold at a public auction. They moved into a small rented duplex on the outskirts of the city, their social standing entirely erased. I watched none of this happen in person. I only heard the echoes through the legal and financial networks I now operated within. I felt no pity. I felt no triumphant joy. I felt the crisp, clean air of a life lived entirely on my own terms. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my executive office. The Chicago skyline stretched out before me, a grid of steel glass and raw ambition. The winter sun reflected off the surface of Lake Michigan, casting a brilliant, blinding light across the city. I logged into my secure banking portal on my tablet. The interface loaded, displaying the balance of my primary holding account. $40 million. A younger version of myself might have viewed that number as a weapon, a tool to bludgeon the people who had hurt me. But gazing at the digits on the screen, I realized the true value of the capital. It was not a sword. It was a fortress. The money represented an impenetrable wall between my peace and their chaos. It was the physical manifestation of my sovereignty. I tapped the screen, opening a transfer authorization form. I was not going to let the capital sit idle in a vault. I drafted a wire transfer for $5 million, routing the funds to a newly established philanthropic subsidiary. I named it the Margaret Initiative, honoring the grandmother who had quietly encouraged my independence. The initiative had a very specific mandate. It provided zero equity seed grants to female tech founders operating outside the traditional venture capital ecosystem. Women who did not have elite pedigrees, women who were told their ideas were impractical, women who were mocked at dinner tables and instructed to find real jobs. I was going to fund the architects who were building empires in the dark. I was going to ensure that the next generation of invisible daughters had the capital they needed to kick the doors down. I finalized the transfer and locked the tablet. The screen went dark. I looked down at the bustling streets below. Thousands of people moving through the financial district, chasing deals, chasing approval, chasing leverage. I had spent 3 decades trapped in a rigged game, forced to play by rules designed to ensure I always lost. I had learned the hardest lesson the corporate world has to offer. The ultimate revenge is never about destroying your enemy. Destroying them requires you to stay in the mud with them, trading blows and expending energy on people who offer zero return on investment. The perfect retaliation is ascending to an altitude where your enemies can no longer breathe. It is building an ecosystem so vast and so secure that their insults, their threats, and their existence become statistically insignificant. I did not need to ruin them. I just needed to outgrow them. I turned away from the window and walked back to my granite desk. I picked up a sleek silver pen and pulled a new stack of integration blueprints toward me. The Vanguard acquisition was complete, but the work was far from over. I had a company to scale, a foundation to launch, and a future to design. They called my passion a cute hobby. In the end, I was the one who owned the entire board. I sit in the quiet of my River North office long after the staff has gone home. The city lights of Chicago blink to life, forming a sprawling grid of commerce and unyielding ambition. Looking down at the streets where I once stood, threatened and cornered, I realize the most profound shift is not the figure in my investment accounts. It is the pristine stillness in my mind where my family's relentless criticism used to live. Reflecting on the journey from that Thanksgiving dinner to this executive suite, I carry 3 unshakable truths forward. First, genetics do not constitute a lifelong debt. Society conditions us to endure toxic behavior simply because it originates from a parent or a sibling. We are taught to view shared DNA as an unbreakable contract. It is not. Respect is a currency, and relationships must remain solvent to survive. When people demand your unconditional loyalty while draining your dignity to fund their own illusions, they are no longer your family. They are a bad investment. Severing those ties is not a betrayal. It is a necessary risk management strategy to protect your own future. Second, true leverage is always constructed in the dark. Julian and my parents confused volume with power.
They shouted issued ultimatums and paraded their fragile wealth, believing that intimidation equaled strength. But real power never needs to announce its arrival. Never correct an opponent who is busy underestimating you. Let them mock your ambitions. Let them assume they hold the winning hand. While they waste their energy performing for an audience, you secure the assets, review the ledgers, and wait for the ink to dry. You do not waste time arguing with a bully. You simply acquire the ground they stand on. Finally, I learned the genuine nature of retaliation. If my only goal had been to orchestrate their ruin, I would still be tethered to their ecosystem. I would still be playing their game. True vindication does not come from destroying the people who hurt you. It comes from achieving an altitude where their venom can no longer reach you. By securing my grandmother's legacy and funding the next generation of female founders, I rewrote the narrative. You win the war by walking away from their battlefield and building an empire where you dictate the rules. I close my laptop and turn off the desk lamp. The reflection in the glass is a woman who refused to remain a footnote in someone else's ego trip. You always hold the pen to your own life. If you found value in this journey from an invisible sister to a corporate founder, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own potential? I read every single response. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video here on Hazel Tells Stories. Until next time, keep your moves silent and let your success make the noise.